All right, we have made 4 keyframes, moving forward, looking down, moving forward, looking down. I basically have what I consider three move patterns. I've got 3 move patterns, one after another. Looking at the preview here, we see that we're moving through the scene, progressively looking down. All right, so that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. The nice thing about this particular animation is that as we move forward, we're looking at the interesting scenes that are below the camera. All right, and you'll notice here that as we look down, the horizon is moving up relative to our point of view, moving up, and that's giving the whole animation some interesting movement. And we're actually drawing in, visually, we're drawing in more detail, more interesting structures. As we look down, we've got this sense of depth. There is like no floor, all right, and we're changing the horizon, and I think that this is a pretty interesting animation. And so far, we've really only done something fairly simple. We've actually moved forward and looked down. We've only really utilized 2 movement, I don't know, what would you call them, angles or whatever, but so I think that's pretty good. All right. That's pretty good. And you'll notice here that since we are moving, all right, we're not actually diving into any of the Mandelbulb, what would you call them, objects or protrusions or nodules, whatever you want to call them. We're not actually diving into them. You don't want to do that. You don't want to collide with your environment. But you want to view it. You want to be close enough where it's interesting, and the closer you are to an object as you're moving, the more interesting it is, the more detail it is. Now there's something else I want to point out here. You notice the speed here. All right, now I've got this running at 30 frames per second, and you'll notice up here that I said, look, give me 100 subframes between each keyframe. So that is giving me it's a little quick, it's a little fast. So what this is telling me is that 100 keyframes at 2,000 steps forward is a bit fast. There's a couple ways I can handle this. I want to slow this down. I do not want to get into my video editing software and bring that frame rate down. I don't want to do that because it's going to be jumpy and jittery. It's going to be a lousy movie if I try to compensate, if I try to slow it down, unless you're dealing with a really, really, really good video editor. You don't want to do that. And if I want to publish my animation at 60 frames per second, it doesn't go any higher than 30, but this is twice as fast as that. So what this tells me, by analyzing this preview at 30 frames per second and having kept track of this information, and this information is not clear up in here. There's no notes, there's no information, there's nothing telling me about these keyframes except the number of subframes in between. By keeping these notes here, I can look back and say, look, all right, it's clear to me that 10 steps forward at 200 step count is a little fast. A little fast. I might do 5 steps forward at 200 steps counts per step, or I might do 5,000 step count on these these 10 steps forward. The look down is okay. The look down is not happening so rapidly. It's nice and gradual. The look down is okay. But the forward motion is a bit fast. What you want to do is you want to plan your animation. This is a key point now. Remember this or write this down. What you want to do is you want to plan for the speed of your animation to be good at 60 frames per second. 60. I'm a little fast running at 30. All right, I look at these numbers here and I say, okay, well, look, you know, I got to do something else here. I got to do something else. What I could do is I can increase the number of subframes. If 30 subframes is that speed, I'm sorry, if 100 subframes at 30 frames per second is that speed, what would be half of that speed? All right, it would be 200 subframes at 30, and I might even want to go 500 subframes, because in your video editor it's going to be much easier and better for you to actually slow the animation down. In other words, you've got too many subframes, more subframes than you need. It's always easier and retains quality if you slow the animation down rather than if you speed it up. So rule of thumb is you're better off if you have too many subframes in between your keyframes, because in the video editor you can slow them down. You can slow the motion down. If you have too few subframes, it's not going to look good if you try to speed it up in your video editor. Okay? All right, so little tidbits along the way. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to stop this preview. We're going to end this session here. And I'm going to increase the number of these frames in between. I'm going to go for 300. All right, and then I'm going to re-preview it. I got to modify my notes. All right, because if you don't keep these notes, you're going to get lost. And a little tidbit that we'll talk about later is I will not proceed with more keyframes until I'm very happy with the movement and the speed in these early keyframes, because that's where I will establish the speed through the environment. If I wait till later, I'm all messed up. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to increase this to, what did I say, 300? I'm going to modify my notes, and then we're going to re-preview it, and we'll take a look at what we've got. Okay? All right. So I'll see you in the next session, and we'll take a look at my alterations. See you there.